Appalachia has always been home to some of the craftiest and most cunning mountaineers. Men who excelled in always getting the upper hand and easily outwitting any city slicker. Coming up, prepare yourself for the true stories of some of the wiliest slicksters you've ever heard of. Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Appalachian Storyteller. Our first true story takes place in Yancey County, North Carolina, where Professor Dr. Eliza Mitchell was in search of the tallest mountain in Appalachia when things suddenly went terribly wrong, and soon there was no one who could come to his rescue except a local mountain man named Big Tom. Nowadays, a lot of folks don't know it, but there was once a time in the 1800s when no one truly knew which mountain stood the tallest in Appalachia. Part of the reason was that the highest peaks were so remote, plus there were no tools that had been invented that could determine the exact height. This led to local folklores and debates on which was truly the crown jewel of the vast mountain chain that stretched across America into Canada. The result of all this uncertainty led to scientists and politicians both racing to discover the highest peaks so that they could name them after themselves. The last person anyone ever thought would determine the outcome of this debate was a mountain man, and this is the incredible true story of how Appalachia's highest peaks got their names. The chief actors in this story are two men. One was a noted scholar and scientist. The other was a gigantic hillsman, a mighty hunter of the bear and deer that for ages have roamed the vastness of the great Appalachian Mountains. To begin this story properly, we must go back a decade before the Civil War. To most Americans at that time, the great virgin mountain masses of Tennessee and the Carolinas were sparsely populated by straggling descendants of the pioneers of the first Great Migration, and they were inaccessible except for a few steep and dangerous ox cart roads that sooner or later petered out among the highest hills into steeper and more dangerous game trails. No official surveys had been undertaken by the government, and the altitude of the remote peaks of the Blue Ridge and the Great Smoky Mountains were unknown. There were many conflicting estimates, partly guesswork, partly based on inaccurate private surveys, and colored by local pride that occasionally appeared in print. A certain peak in the Great Smoky Mountains, now known as Clingman's Dome, was generally believed to be the highest point, and its height was often declared to be upward of 8,000 feet. Most folks in New England, on the other hand, stoutly maintained Mount Washington and the White Mountains was the loftiest peak in the Appalachias. About 1856, a committee in Congress was considering a request to officially name the Great Dome of the Smoky Mountains to Clingman's Dome in honor of Thomas Clingman, a longtime politician looking to leave a permanent mark on his legacy to be remembered long after he was gone. However, at the same time, a man named Elijah Mitchell was a professor of chemistry and geology in North Carolina, and oddly enough, he had once been the teacher of Thomas Clingman. The professor and his former pupil had a long-running debate between the two men about which of the two peaks was officially the tallest mountain, and just like that, a race between Clingman and Mitchell ensued to be the first to name Appalachia's tallest mountain in each man's honor. Now, Professor Mitchell was about 60 years old, and a modest man who had spent years as a surveyor and many summers in the mountains on scientific explorations, where he used biometric pressure devices to determine the altitude of mountain peaks. Despite his age, the professor decided to set out in June of 1857 with a small party of friends bound for the mountain summit located in the Black Mountains of North Carolina, which 20 years before he had first explored and declared to be the highest peak in all of Appalachia. It was his plan to look up some of those native guides that had traveled with him on that previous survey, and he would secure their sworn statements to be filed with other documentary proof with the Congressional Committee. Now, back in those days, it was a long and toilsome journey from Asheville to the summit of the suspected highest peak. The mountains were full of every type of wild animal, both known and unknown, and a man could easily get lost in these mountains and never be seen again. Yet the professor was confident He had set a rough stone marker there years ago at the exact spot that he had calculated to be the highest point of land east of the Rocky Mountains. So Professor Mitchell and his group struck out, and within a few days they had reached the top. However, the professor decided to dismiss his companions and continue his journey alone down into the deep valley of the Yancey side of the Great Ridge, where he hoped to secure an affidavit from an old trapper and guide by the name of Big Tom Wilson. He knew he could count on help from Big Tom and the loyal mountaineers who had come to know and love the professor as the years had gone by. No one knew it at the time, but when the professor split up with his friends at the top of the Black Dome, this would be the last time that anyone would ever see Professor Mitchell alive. By the third day, the professor's family became alarmed, and the next day they sent out a small search party to find him. But soon it was learned that he had never reached the home of Big Tom. And even more alarming, none of the mountain folks had even seen or heard from him. So a large search party was quickly formed, and a day and night manhunt commenced as the men combed one after another of the massive ridges and ravines with dogs and lanterns. They kept in touch with one another by prearranged gunshot signals. Still, several days passed without a single trace of the professor, when word finally made it to Big Tom that the professor was lost deep in the mountains and that no one could find him. So Big Tom arranged a small group of mountain men to join the search. Now you have to keep in mind that Big Tom was a giant of a man, a stranger to fear, and familiar with every mile of the dark wilderness of the Black Mountains. He was a legendary bear hunter who had killed 114 bears. Big Tom possessed a remarkable degree of almost uncanny power that few men outside of the Indians had ever acquired in reading the signs of man or beast in the woods. The veteran hunter and his group of seasoned mountain men set out to the top of the dome where the professor was last seen, where they gathered the only known details. The professor had intended to take the beach nursery trail to the foot of the mountain. Big Tom and his men set out in a single file line with the giant man in the lead. He had barely gone a half mile when his eye caught something significant that all the other parties had missed. "Look, boys," he shouted. "Right here's where the man missed the trail. Instead of bearing to the left like he ought, he turned down towards Piney Ridge. And right there, in that minute, he was lost. Oh, and bad lost." Sure enough, as they pressed down the right-hand side of the trail, which was probably little more than a bear path, here and there appeared the faint but still recognizable tracks of a man headed towards the desolate waste under the frowning tops of the Twin Peaks, known as the Black Brother Mountains. "He couldn't have been making no time in here, boys," Big Tom declared a half hour later. "See how he had to tramp down the bush right there and fight through the laurel? And here's a piece of his torn out coat." 2 miles more, they pushed on through the grueling forest that was hard even for sturdy mountaineers. For the aged professor, oh, it must have been a grilling experience. "Here's where dark overtook him. Look where he twisted that pine knot out of that log. And here's where a coal from the torch dropped to the ground when he crossed that log." 2 more miles through the tangled briars and the jagged ledges and down the boulder-strewn bed of the little creek. "Of course, boys, by this time he knowed he was lost," Big Tom said. "But he figured this creek would take him down to Cane River, which it naturally does, only it's a terrible way to get there." Suddenly, the men's ears caught the sound of a distant roar of falling water from far below. "Listen, boys, there's a falls ahead of us. Keep your eyes peeled, fellas." A few hundred yards more, and the roar grew louder. They were at the very top of the ledge. "Look, boys," Big Tom sang out. "He was trying to get around to the right of this place at night. So he grabbed a hold of this little sapling, and his foot slipped on that rock right there. That sapling broke right off in his hand. Boys, I hate to tell you, but that poor old man fell right over them falls. We'll find him down there just as sure as the world."
Hey guys, JD Phillips here from the Appalachian Storyteller. Today's video is sponsored by tnnursery.net.
Family owned and operated in the heart of Appalachia, TN Nursery ships beautiful plants and trees all across America. Perennials, ferns, vines, trees, and much, much more. Click the link in the description to shop America's favorite garden shop. for quality landscaping trees and plants. Get 15% off of your order by using promo code STORYTELLER at checkout. Climbing down over the rocks through the undergrowth, the men at last reached the foot of the cliff, which tumbled over a foam and cascade of water approximately 20 feet high, and at its foot was a deep, dark, jug-shaped pool of swirling foam 10 to 12 feet across. Even the strongest swimmer couldn't have kept afloat in that mad little whirlpool. At first, they couldn't see anything in the churning water, but finally Big Tom made out a dark object underneath the surface, lying across a sunken birch log that had long ago fallen into the pool. And in the bottom of that sunless gorge, there they lifted the body of Professor Mitchell from its watery grave. Sadly, and with much labor, the men carried the professor back up the long miles and delivered him to his friends who were waiting at the top. Big Tom and his team of mountaineers urged them to lay the professor at rest right there on top of the mountain. However, the professor's friends took his body back to Asheville and buried him in a local cemetery. So, now with the professor dead and his claim of the tallest mountain being unproven, the United States Congress officially named Clingman's Dome the tallest mountain in all of Appalachia. And it appeared that the student had indeed outsmarted his professor after all. However, several years later, when the government finally surveyed the mountain that the professor had died trying to prove was the tallest, they did in fact confirm that it was taller than Clingman's Dome by 41 feet. The professor had been right all along. So his family dug up his bones in that Asheville cemetery, and they reburied him at the top of the mountain that the United States government officially named the tallest mountain in Appalachia, Mount Mitchell, in honor of Professor Mitchell. As for Big Tom, well, he would live for another 50 years in those same mountains, living free among the wild animals in the wilderness. And when he finally passed away in 1908, the United States government named the mountain next to Mount Mitchell Big Tom Mountain, ensuring that both the professor and Big Tom's legacy will always live on forever in the Appalachian Mountains. Don't go anywhere, folks. There's plenty more to come, and you don't want to miss the next true story. The art of the poker face is a must-have in any negotiation, but I'll tell you right now, no one had a better poker face than Sam Brinkley. The events hereafter might have never happened if Samuel Brinkley hadn't stopped to look at his face in the old mirror by the cabin window. The point is, this was the first time in 7 weeks that he had been allowed to glance at a looking glass. That's because he had been having a long, hard tussle with typhoid, and because Tennessee mountain folks know, even if those city doctors don't, that sick people who see themselves in a glass will die. Samuel was able to put his clothes on, and Mary, as attentive a nurse as she was an energetic wife, guided his steps towards the window and the pillow-padded chair by the chimney. "It's safe for you to take a look at your whiskers, Pa," she said good-humoredly. "You put me in the mind of one of those clowns that we seen that time at the circus." The fever-wasted mountaineer surveyed his image in the cracked and dingy glass. His 2 months of coal-black beard threw into startling contrast the pallor of his sunken jaws and his white forehead. He stroked the thick stubble slowly. "Mary," he piped weakly, "it 'pears for a sick man I've raised a right smart crop of whiskers. My granddad had a master beard on him. Do you recall ever seeing him?" "Yes, Pa," Mary replied. "I remember seeing your granddaddy lots of times when I was a gal. I used to be scared to meet up with him on the road. His big black whiskers, they looked plumb scary to a youngin'. Now come on and sit a while I make up your bed." Samuel sat down on the cushioned chair, where the sunshine fell greatly upon his weak frame. It was good to gaze again upon the friendly ruggedness of the waters of No Business Creek that ran just across the holler. He would soon be out there once more among the other mountaineers who ran the puffing engines and fed the whining saws at the lumber mill. Again he rubbed his scrubby cheeks and chin. "Mary," he said, "let me have one more look-see in that glass. I've got a mind to just let 'em keep growing a spell. Granddad always said a good beard looked mighty fine on a fella." "I reckon you can let 'em stay a while, Pa," the mountain woman replied. "You're sort of whopper-jawed anyway, and a beard would set right well on you until you get all fleshed up some. I ain't willing, though, to let you grow it big and bristly like your grandsires was. The youngins will be scared of you for sure. And yes, that's why I crave to raise me a good set of whiskers, Mary." There was a plaintive eagerness in the weak voice. In this day and time, youngins need to have more fear and respect for those in authority, especially their pa, which the good book plainly says he ought to be the head of the family. There's too many women and children nowadays, a ripping and a tearing and a running, hither and yonder, a pleasuring themselves. Us men and fathers, we should be tending to our duty of raising hair on our chins and our chests, like the old patriarchs of the scriptures. This bit of social and domestic philosophy brought no audible response from the busy wife, who was briskly fixing up the bed, and Samuel failed to see the momentary smile that lit up her stoic face like the swift glow of heat lightning on a summer evening cloud. "Now, Pa, get back in bed," she directed, in the quiet way of one accustomed to being obeyed. "I've tidied up your straw tick, and I put a clean slip on your pillow. Now I'll make you a little mess of squirrel broth for your supper." In a few weeks, the gang at the sawmill welcomed Samuel back to his place as operator of the cutoff saw. And as his softened muscles grew back to their wonted hardness, his beard also grew. The mill hands made it the subject of much banter and even threatened to impress the services of Tony Tinker, the rough and ready camp barber. Now Samuel, he was extremely sensitive to banter, a stalwart of body he was, and a good hand on any job in the woods. But inwardly, he was a shrinking soul, albeit far from him to admitting that fact to anyone, even himself. He secretly nursed the worthy ambition to be known as a domineering, hard-boiled brute of a man. Particularly did he envision himself as lord and master of the domestic kingdom consisting of Mary and his 8 young children of assorted ages and sizes. If he was more touchy on one point than all others, it was on the question of his status as head of the house of Samuel. Now Mary, be it said, was outwardly all that a mountain man's helpmate should be. In proper highland fashion, she worked her man's crops, cooked his meals, spread his table, and when he had a guest, she served as waitress, silently renewing the biscuit and keeping the coffee cups full, and remaining elsewise alert but invisible in the kitchen. Nevertheless, she came from the McDavick stock, which wasn't altogether in her favor. The McDavicks were regarded by the No Business Creek folk as a woman-bedeviled lot of men persons. It was even rumored that some of the men in that unfortunate clan had to do the milking and the churning. And if the truth must be told, Samuel himself had his moments of doubt as to Mary's full and unseen acceptance of the apostolic doctrine of wifely submission. Mary had a way about her at times, to say the least. Despite the jesting of the mill hands, Samuel held fast to his resolve to let him grow a spell. He had a feeling that a full beard was going to enhance his dignity as a lord of creation. He never dreamt that he was suffering from an inferiority complex, but he did suspect that his neighbors were whispering that Mary wore the breeches in their household. And sure enough, the young and inspiring beard was already adding the marks of distinction to his otherwise unimposing face, and he could see that himself. It soon became apparent, too, that the beard, or something, was working a noticeable change in the attitude of his fellow men. The gang had suddenly taken to calling him Sir, and once or twice, a new man had even addressed him as Mr. Samuel. It really paid to look rugged, just as his granddad had said. The months went by and lengthened into years in the slow, slinking way that old time has in the mountains. But as for Samuel Brinkley, he seemed to defy time, and somehow he got away with it. He looked scarcely a day older, and his well-knit frame remained just as straight and stout as ever. And his beard, well, it was a beard now. In fact, it had come to be accepted by the general public as part of the order of nature. For him, to be sure, it had begun to assume some aspects of a major problem. For one thing, it got in his way as he deftly caught the pine boards that came endlessly by the conveyor rolls to the cut-off saw, and it was really dangerous. It's sort of risky around a sawmill, he admitted. I heard the other day a fellow over at the North Camp got too close to a belt, and before he could say scoot, he lost a plumb beautiful beard and most of the face that it growed on. Now Samuel's was certainly not a beard of the common garden variety. It once was blacker than midnight in a coal mine and glossier than a crow's wing. But now it was a beautiful silver, like the prophets of old. It fell like a curtain well below his knees. That is, when he allowed it to fall, as he sometimes did for the edification of admiring friends. Most of the time, though, he carried it folded carefully in a black satin pouch that he wore on the inside of his vest underneath his coat. And soon he was a local legend as he passed through the No Business Creek community carrying his trailing beard in his specially made pocket. One Saturday, a score of mill hands off duty were loafing in the company store watching the valiant but futile efforts of a patient medicine salesman who tried to land a fat order from Dan Bickett, the canny manager of the camp store. "No, there ain't nothing I'm needing today," drawled the soft-spoken manager. "These fellas around here, they're a right healthy lot, and when they're ailing, they mostly stick to salts, balsam oil, and sassafras." "Now just a moment, Mr. Bickett," the fluent salesman came back undaunted. "I was about to overlook one thing, one of the most necessary preparations for any well-stocked store. And as you know, there's a great deal of baldness among timbermen. Now I have one of the best remedies for baldness ever offered to the public. Dr. Flimber's Peerless Hair Restorer and Scalp Invigorator. Endorsed by clergymen and recommended by the press everywhere. Just $1 a bottle. Let me send you a trial order, Mr. Bickett." "Say, mister," a burly teamster sang out, "is that stuff guaranteed to raise whiskers too?" "Why, the surest thing you know," came the quick response. "It'll grow burnsides on a billiard ball and chin whiskers on a doorknob. Try a bottle, my good man. Only $1. "No, I ain't hunting no more troubles than what I've got," the man retorted. "It already takes a brand new razor to get me fixed up Sunday morning now. But there's another fella here who's trying awful hard to get some chin tassels sprouted. I reckon you could sell him a whole case of it if it's got a guarantee to it." Soon, a chorus of other onlookers chimed in agreement of this opinion. Someone hurried out to find Samuel and returned presently with the shaggy sawmill man in tow. "Samuel," Dan Bickett drawled, "we've been telling this man here about you trying to start up a beard, and he claims he's got the growingest stuff there is to rub on your feeble efforts to grow a beard and speed 'em up a little bit." The salesman took one look at the mountaineer and joined heartily in the laugh that went around. He thought he saw the joke. Really, though, he hadn't seen half of it. To be more accurate, he had only seen 12 inches or so of Samuel's beard that terminated at the top of the invisible black pouch. He didn't even suspect that a half yard or so laid cold within. "Well, my friend," he remarked, "I'll hand it to you. You've made a fine beginning in beard production. But if you start using Dr. Flimberg's Peerless Hair Restorer and Scalp Invigorator at once, in less than 6 months, you'd have a beard that would reach your knees. See here, I'm going to make you as a fair a proposition as you had ever heard. You take 3 bottles of this tonic and use it according to the directions, and I'll be back this way next spring. And if you're entirely satisfied, you pay me $3. And if you're not, you pay me nothing. And that's not all. If you do use this treatment faithfully, and you don't have your beard cut before I get back, I'll have your picture made for our advertising department, and we'll pay you a certain amount for every inch of beard that you grow. as a result of our remarkable product. Well, how much will you pay? The shrewd hillsman queried. Well, let's suppose we make it $1 for every full inch of new growth by that time. How does that strike you? And Samuel almost gasped, but his face betrayed no hint of his astonishment. I reckon that'll be reasonable enough, he casually replied. And how long do you judge it is now, mister? Oh, I have nothing to measure it with, but I'd say it looks from this distance to be about 12 inches. The mill hands would have torn the house down with their shouts had Dan Bickett not forestalled their outburst with a warning wink. Samuel's face was as solemn as a veteran politician. Well, mister, it might be a smidgen longer than that, he said soberly. That's all right, my friend. I see you want to be strictly honest, but what's a little matter of an inch or so between friends? We'll have these men here as witnesses that when I come back, I'll pay you $1 for every inch of beard that you've grown above 12 inches. That's satisfactory, isn't it? Well, I'm satisfied if you are, mister, Samuel replied, and the salesman hurried away to catch the train.
Give someone you love the gift of old-fashioned storytelling. 4 books for the young and old alike that will make your heart smile. Click the link below to order your copy of the Appalachian Storyteller today.
The busy weeks passed quickly. Samuel used the hair restorer and the scalp invigorator faithfully according to the directions. For a whole week, he was fired with determination. He was going to be the proud owner of the longest, thickest beard ever boasted in all the glorious history of Appalachia. Had he not been promised, in the presence of good men and truth, that he should have his picture published? Fame stood knocking at his door. The restorer and the invigorator, however, proved to be a foul-smelling stuff and messy to apply. On the 6th day, he took the remaining 2 7/8 bottles and threw them in a gully behind his cabin. As for the beard, though, it continued to grow. It needed no restorer and no invigorator. It flourished like grass after a summer rain. Before the summer had come again, Samuel had attained the goal of his towering ambition. His beard, when he chose to let it fall at full length, to the delight of gawking onlookers, it trailed a good 6 inches on the floor. And Samuel was a big man, 6 feet 2 inches tall, standing in his socks, and it was a wondrous sight to see. The eventful day came when the medicine salesman arrived again in the camp and made his way to Dan Bickett's camp store. No, there ain't nothing I'm needing today, Dan muttered. I reckon, though, you'll be having a settlement with Samuel Brinkley today, won't you? You remember the fella that you gave that hair medicine to, and you was going to pay him for his whiskers if he was able to raise any. Oh, yes, I do recall him, the salesman replied. Sure, I'll be glad to see how he's come out with it. I wonder where he is. Well, he'll be here in a jiffy, Bickett answered. A crowd of roughnecks filed in, with Samuel marching at the head of the pack and trying to appear as calm and casual as if this wasn't the great day for which he had waited for many months. The salesman came forward, extending a welcoming hand. Well, Mr. Brinkley, I'm glad to see you again. I guess you've come to close our little deal about that fine beard, huh? Yeah, I reckon I'm about as nigh ready as I'm likely to get, he replied in an offhand manner. Well, let's see, began the salesman. I believe we were to start with the 12 inches you had last year and measure the growth since then, weren't we? That was the sense of it, I believe, mister. Well, Mr. Brinkley, I hope you used the restorer faithfully, and you have several inches of healthy, vigorous growth to show for your efforts. Well, sir, I did the best I could with it, and I reckon nobody could have done a better job than that. No, indeed, my friend. Now step over here by this window, and we'll take this yardstick and measure the exact length of your beard today. Samuel moved to the window. The spectators gathered around in a silent circle. Samuel opened his coat and fumbled a moment with the straps that held his pouch in place. Then, something soft, silver and black, and shiny rippled to the floor. The lanky mountaineer rose to his full 6 feet 2, his head up high like an ancient pirate. Nevertheless, a foot or more of the beard fell down to the rough floorboards. The crowd could hold it no longer. With ear-splitting roars and shrieks, they fairly lifted the ceiling off the old storeroom. They laughed until they had to sit down on whatever came handy. Counters, nail kegs, and some on the floor itself. The official representative of Dr. Flimberg's peerless restorer rose to the occasion and proved himself a game sport. He knew the joke was on him, but he wanted the crowd to get their money's worth. He was going to get his, and it wasn't going to cost him anything. And his chemical company, well, they were going to get some real advertising. For half a minute, he stood in speechless amazement, as he knew he was expected to do. And then, once the uproar subsided, he grasped the hand of the big woodsman. "Oh man, you win. You've got the prize beard of Tennessee. You've given the finest demonstration of what Flimberg's Restorer will do when used regularly and persistently. I'm going to pay you $50 in cold hard cash right now without even putting a yardstick to your beard. Let's shake on it." Samuel extended a rough hand while the body of men exploded with a new outburst of sheer joy. "Now hold on, I'm not done yet," the plucky salesman shouted, waving his arms to quiet the racket. "My good friend, why waste your time as a common laborer on this sawmill job? With you as living proof to the marvelous efficiency of this great hair tonic, I can sell a carload of it in every town from Bristol to Chattanooga. I'm going to make you a proposition. You go with me this very afternoon to Johnson City, and we'll start out on a partnership basis. You'll make more money than you ever saw in your life. We'll ride in Pullmans, pull up at the swell hotels, and together we'll sit atop the entire world." Just like that, Samuel Brinkley was destined to become world famous, far beyond the walled-in world of mountains in Appalachia. Photos of his miraculous beard appeared in newspapers and magazines all over the world. Old Sam, a mountain man who had never been more than 10 miles beyond No Business Creek, went on to travel 44 states in America and Canada and Mexico. He was featured in many traveling circuses as the man with the longest beard in the world, with the Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey Circus, and John Robinson's and Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. And now, you know the amazing story of Samuel Brinkley.
A beard so long that you could lose a small child in it. Wow, what an incredible story. Coming up, we've saved the best for last, and you don't want to miss it. We're back, and before we get started with our next story, I'd like for you to take a moment and click that like and subscribe button. This simple act helps the channel so much. Now then, let's get back to it. Now, I'll be the first one to admit it, that no one likes a liar. But some folks have a unique ability to stretch the truth in ways that are a thing of beauty. And no one was a better liar than Lion Amos. This is a true story that will entertain you, make you laugh, and leave you speechless.
He was a new man, or he'd have known better. No old-timer on the timber gang would have been rash enough to expose himself to the deadly banner of Dragon Hiram, teamster ordinary and humorist extraordinary in the employment of the Dry Branch Lumber Company. The newcomer had been taken on that morning by Silas Turner, the woods boss, and put to work on the skidder crew. He was a seasoned-looking roughneck in new overalls, with new rawhide laces in his stout logger's boots. He handled the axe with a skill that excited the admiration of the foreman and the envy of the crew. When the noon whistle blew, the skidder boys hustled down to the mess shack of Camp 7, where the loggers and the loaders of the Turner outfit had already gone through the washing up process and were seated about the shack, awaited on Dinner Boy Pete's artistic rendition of every man's favorite tune on the brass dinner bell. Last of all came Hiram Parsons. As usual, he had taken the time to rub down and feed his big Clydesdales before coming into the shack for his own feed. He was a big, loosely constructed mountaineer who had lived a rigorous life in the woods. His full-fed cheeks shone rosily above a week's worth of reddish stubble mixed with streaks of insipid gray. He crossed the foot log over the branch and greeted the crowd with stentorian jolly. "Howdy, fellas. It's the best time of the day once again." Then he caught the sight of the stranger seated on an inverted tub and leaning against the wall of the shack, his hat on the ground beside him. "Howdy, stranger," Hiram shouted at the top of his voice. "How does your capacity appear to stanchiate?" The effort at a pleasantry was older than the oldest man in the works, older than everything in sight except for the ancient hills. but not too old to raise a roar of laughter, supposedly at the new man's expense. All joined in the laugh except for the stranger himself. He looked a bit sheepish, and when the last hawing had died away, he responded cheerfully, "Well, I reckon I'm doing all right, mister. How do you get along?" Hiram Parsons had not come by his name of Dragon Hiram by accident. You see, he had a way of making jokes at others' expense, all in fun, just passing the time really. And laughter, it seemed to help pass the time. It mattered not to Hiram or his audiences that his jokes had been told countless times. They were delivered with such dispatch and gusto and followed by such explosions and reverberations of his own laughter that they carried the crowd by storm. The luckless victim could only cower in his shell hole until the barrage was lifted. It was unfortunate, therefore, that the stranger in the camp should have drawn the enemy's fire by shooting off his own innocent little pop gun by asking, "How do you get along?" "Why, partner, I got here on my feet. How do you reckon I got here?" And the gang screamed their mirth as though they had not heard the same old mountain gag 100 times before. The new man looked a little dazed, but he said nothing until the merriment had subsided again, and then he smilingly observed, "Well, I reckon you drugged me pretty good that time, didn't you, mister?" Instantly the answer flashed, "Well, I tell you, you look like buzzards that drugged you until they rubbed all the hair off the back of your head." This was an obvious reference to the bald spot the stranger had exposed when he removed his hat. In the roar that followed in the second hit, even the dinner boy Pete joined in. Even his side shook in cadence with the rhythmic dinner bell solo he was performing. At the table, the new hand, whose time card bore the name of Amos Hensley, found himself seated opposite of Dragon Hiram, who, flushed with 2 fresh triumphs of his wit, was still thirsty for blood. Hensley was too busy with knife and fork, mostly knife, to take much part in the boisterous mealtime banter. But whenever he did venture to take even the most commonplace remark, it was greeted with salvo from the bristling fort across the table. To be sure, the shots went wild, aimed at nothing and hitting nothing, but Hiram's contagious laughter never failed to set the company in a roar. Hensley, having been 3 days out of a job, ate with the appetite that attracted the attention of every man in the logging camp. And while all the rest of the men were tilting back their chairs, exploring their pockets for goose quill toothpicks, he was just entering the pie phase of the dietic cycle. This circumstance offered Dragon Hiram the pretext for a parting shot. "Take your time, partner," he counseled as he rose to leave. "By the looks of it, your daddy ate powerful fast, and your mammy ate a long time, and you just apparently took after both of them." If Amos Hensley, though, was seriously embarrassed by his warm reception at the hands of the camp humorist, he kept that fact to himself. Already established in the good graces of the boss by his deftness in handling logs, he soon won the hearts of the men with an equal deftness in spinning yarns. Some of his first efforts as a storyteller were taken seriously, as they were apparently meant to be, but it was soon a matter of common knowledge and local pride that Camp 7 was honored by the presence of a fancy liar of no ordinary gifts. You see, if there's one thing that every woodsman holds in equal esteem with brilliant banner, it's artistic lying. Crude everyday lying he righteously scorns as contemptible and unscriptural. But for the venerable whopper that spurns the petty bounds of facts and figures, in the higher interest of spellbinding idealism, he knows no feeling but admiration. Amos Hensley was that kind of a liar, a champion of the lumber camps, who wore his title of Lion Amos with modest but honorable pride. Within a week, he had become a formidable rival of Dragon Hiram as the chief intellectual ornament of Camp 7. Of evenings in the bunkhouse, the favorite program would usually open up with the strains of Sourwood Mountain or Arkansas Traveler from Fletch McCurry's banjo, accompanied by a clog dance from Dinner Boy Pete, whose scowl-bottom feet flopped and shuffled on the boards like a complete rhythm section accompanying the banjo. Then, over in the corner, Amos Hensley would begin. "When I was a filing saws for the Carolina Spruce Company over on the Yancey side of Grandfather Mountain, there was an old-like fella. They come there by the name of, 'Stop that racket, you fellas,' someone would call out. 'Lion Amos is finna tell another one.' And Amos would have the floor, was one of his homely romances, whether of the tallest hemlock, the biggest bandsaw, or the pullingest team of horses, the cussinest boss, or the luckiest hands of cards that ever was on land or sea. Seldom, though, did the evening's entertainment end without a sword clash between Lion Amos and Dragon Hiram. The gang expected it, and Hiram always strove to please. For him, it was a never-failing triumph, and cheaply won at that. Occasionally, though, Amos would put up at least a semblance of a counter-offensive. Being nobody's fool in particular, he would sometimes deliver a neat retort that one of its merits would have put the laugh squarely on his tormentor. But you see, Amos's manner was too mild, and his humor was too subtle for an audience schooled in the knock-down, drag-out methods of his rival. But the lane will turn, and it's a long worm that has no turning, or whatever the proverb says. It's also well known that even the thickest skin has a quick place under it if you stick the pen deep enough. Speaking of skins, there were surface indications that Hiram's pen had found somebody at home. After one particularly vicious thrust, the coarse laughter of the crowd had been prolonged by the sight of the victim's face, which had gone white instead of red, and while his lips tightened and the warm sparkle of his black eyes turned a cold glint. I figured for a minute Lion Amos was about to get his fighting breeches on, Old Man Lawson confided to Abram Mullins, his bunkmate, as they laced their boots the next morning. "No, Mr. Lawson," Abram declared. "Lion Amos's fighting breeches are locked up in his trunk, and the key's lost. That fella can take anything that anybody can throw at him." Little did the rough but kindly men of Camp 7 dream that tragic events impended, under whose sobering stress all petty animosities would be forgotten in a moment. All the long, hot Sunday afternoon, the crew sat outside the bunkhouse, smoking, playing cards, nailing massive half-soles on the worn boots, and mending harnesses. Silas Turner, the boss, had taken the narrow-gauge engine, number 6, with 3 men, including Lion Amos, to inspect a new trestle that had been thrown together across a ravine up near the upper end of the line. Dragon Hiram sat on a rude bench on the shady end of the house, from which position he commanded a view up the track. The heat waves from the rails shimmered in the boiling sun. Hiram seemed to only be smoking and dozing, but in reality, he was in the throes of cognition, trying to frame some more subtle and mirth-provoking banner that had ever fallen upon the responsive ears of his loyal constituents. Suddenly, a figure appeared far up the track, rounding the curve at a rapid walking pace. In a moment, the characteristic slew-footed list identified the walker as Lion Amos. For so hot a day, Amos was certainly making good time. "I wonder what's a pushing Lion Amos," called out one of the Skeeter crew. "He sure is working the slew leg for all it's worth. Hey, let's get him started on one of his big yarns," said another. And at that suggestion, an evil smile lurked on Dragon Hiram's broody face. "That's a plumb good idea, boys," he said. "I'll banner him to do himself loud this time, and then I've got a brand new drag that I'll get off on him." And scenting the battle from afar, the gang began instinctively to close around the champion. As soon as Amos's sprightly limp brought him within hailing distance, Hendrick sang out, "Hey there, Amos. Lighten your load and rest your saddle. Won't you come and get a chair and sit down and tell us the biggest lie you ever heard? We're just all a-pining away, waiting to hear a good old whopper, a biggin." But a glance at Amos's face showed that it was no errand of mirth-making that he had come for. Tragedy was written there. He didn't even smile at the jester's words, but he staggered to a place in the center of the group, where he stood panting, a breathless herald of important news. "Fellas, there's trouble back up yonder. Number 6 busted through that trestle at the gap, and Silas Turner is a lying under her, pinned against a pile of cross ties. He can talk, though, and he's set for Hiram to get a crew of the best men in the camp and fetch the axes and block the tackle so you can hoist the trucks off of him. It'll be 3 hours before the wrecking train can get up there." Instantly, Camp 7 was astir. Stalwart men, chosen by Hiram, nearly ran over each other in their haste to grab ropes and pulleys and axes. Hiram was a dozen yards ahead of the rest of the men when the relief party set out on the 6-mile walk. Now, he wasn't a walker, as most mountaineers are, but he felt complimented that the boss, in his hour of need, had recognized him as the man to pick a crew and come to the rescue. He therefore took the lead all the way, albeit with vast expenditure of wind and water, for he was panting like a farrier's bellows and sweating like a leaky barrel. "Come on, fellas, just as fast as you can, boys." He stopped now and then to urge, while he mopped his steaming brow and caught his breath. "We gotta keep a-hitting it, boys, and help the boss get out of trouble. I reckon I've been a little rough on Lion Amos. He was mighty nigh gave out when he got to camp, but he said he would come right back with us after he blowed his spell. I reckon I'm gonna let up dragging him so hard, seeing how game he showed himself." An hour went by as Hiram's party had toiled and wheezed 4 of the 6 upgrade miles toward the wreck. 30 minutes more and the hard march would be over. Hiram's feet were blistered, and the heavy coil of rope on his back grew heavier and hotter every minute. Suddenly, the Sabbath stillness of the mountains was broken by the shriek of a locomotive from somewhere up the gorge. The weird swelling of the shrill notes indicated that the engine was approaching. The men stopped in amazement. There was no log train in the woods today, and the wrecker couldn't arrive from Beechmont in less than 2 hours from now. And number 6, she was lying wrecked in a ravine 2 miles above. "What in thunder do you make of that, Hiram?" Wiley Anderson gasped between his labored gasp for wind. "Them fellas couldn't have got 6 off the track by themselves, could they?" "Well, gosh, no. Of course they couldn't. It's got me guessing for sure, though," Hiram admitted. "Let's go on. We'll be finding out something before long now." They pressed on again, but they had gone less than 100 yards before they heard the whistle again. This time, much nearer, they stood for a moment, puzzling over the strange situation. The rumble of the approaching engine was heard, and within a few minutes, the familiar head end of number 6 nosed around a sharp curve ahead. She was coasting down the steep grade toward the camp, and when Hiram flagged her down with his red bandana handkerchief, the engineer brought her to a stop where the relief crew stood. "Where in thunder are you uns headed for? Are you hunting a bee tree?" Silas Turner asked as he leaned out the cab window beside the engineer. "Boss, how in the name of Tom Walker did you get her back on the rails? Was you hurt bad?" Hiram asked in his reply. "Get what back on the rails? Who was hurt? What are you uns talking about? You must have found a still house instead of a bee tree," the boss man shot back. In that moment, Dragon Hiram began to see the light. "What did you fellas do with Lion Amos?" "Why, we didn't do anything with him. After we started up towards the new trestle, we found it was too crowded in this little box of a cab, and we made him get off a mile after the camp and walk back," the boss exclaimed. "Did anything happen to him?" "Well, it ain't happened to him yet, boss, but it's about to," Dragon Hiram said as he rose painfully from the stump which he had dropped to rest. Then the men in the cab and the sweating huskies on the ground began to see the light. First, they grinned foolishly. Then they chuckled. And then they roared until the Rocky Canyon walls roared back at them. And Dragon Hiram, he did what most jokers do when the laugh comes the other way. He got mad. Not just peeved or provoked. He was mad. All over. He was so mad he couldn't talk. He couldn't even cuss. He just sputtered. Then he clambered up on the tender with the rest of the crew and sputtered while number 6 coasted into camp. The men in the camp were lined up in front of the mess shack as the would-be rescuers and the would-be have been rescued climbed off the engine. It was a joyous reception. The big roughnecks squealed and howled and bellowed their delight. But Dragon Hiram, he scanned the faces in the crowd for the one face that was conspicuously missing. "Where is that low-down lying skunk?" he shouted above the unabated chorus of mirth. "Well, he's done went and gone from here, Hiram," Jeff Lawson replied, with happy tears still streaking his face. "He said he had a good job waiting for him down at the Carolina Spruce, and he reckoned it was a good time to go get it. But there's his comments that he asked us to give you, so you'd remember him by." And he pointed towards a placard, crudely lettered on a cracker box lid, that was tacked above the mess shack door, and it read, "To Dragon Hiram. So long, partner. I'm sorry I couldn't think of a bigger lie to tell you. But remember this, he that drags the last, drags the furthest."
Thanks so much for watching, folks. Be sure to like and subscribe for more true stories from Appalachia's past.